Thank you everyone for joining LACE Toastmasters' first ever panel discussion. Today we are going to dissect the communication style of VP-Elect Kamala Harris using her acceptance speech. And the communication style generally centers around how a person delivers the speech, not so much on the content, just the how. We're going to look at the language, verbal delivery, non-verbal delivery, use of stage, gestures, body language, the way a person dresses, etc., to assess the effectiveness of their communication style. To begin, I'm going to play 2 minutes of the introduction of Kamala Harris's speech, the part where she enters the stage and her opening statement. I'm about to share my screen. Let me know if you're able to see it.
We see it.
All right, so I'm going to play the first 1 minute in silence, and I'll turn on the audio when she starts to speak.
Anu, for some reason, I don't hear it.
Okay, I pause it there. So while we only listen to 2 minutes of the speech, we are going to evaluate the entire speech. The reason I played the first 1 minute on mute was so that we could just pay complete attention to Kamala Harris, the way she entered the stage, her body language, and tune out everything else. Although you would notice that the energy in the audience is electrifying. So one of the first things about any public speaker is you make an impact and you actually make a statement even before you utter your first word. The way you enter the stage, the way you present yourself is incredibly important. And with that, I would like to ask my first question to Elaine. Elaine, what are your impressions about Kamala Harris's entrance?
I thought that her entrance was spectacular. Going across the stage and waving to people. I wish as a speaker, that was something that I would be able to do to get the audience's attention, but that walking across the stage slowly, waving, I thought that was very, very effective for this type of speech. So I felt that her entrance was effective.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you. I forgot to mention in my excitement to start off the panel discussion that we have some rules, ground rules for our panelists, one of which is that every panelist gets 1 to 2 minutes per question, and that it's really a discussion, less of a debate where we can add our viewpoints to what someone else has already said. Basically that, and really no promotions. So I would now turn over to Margaret, who's our second panelist. And Margaret, what are your thoughts? What do you think about the entrance of Kamala Harris on the stage?
I thought it was electric. And even before she waves, she throws up her hands, and then it's almost as though she's embracing us. And you can feel like the warmth and the excitement and the confidence of this woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. At 7 seconds, she opens up her arms. You know, she has this larger than life presence on stage. It's absolutely beautiful. And Natsuyo, you are someone who evaluates speeches, especially past presidents. What are your thoughts?
Yes,
You can't hear anything.
you can hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, good. So just like you said, Anu, the first impression matters.
Can anybody else? I can't hear anything.
I can.
I can hear Natsuyo.
And I can hear you, Mary. Okay. Did we lose her?
Maybe
Anyways.
she's reconnected. Go ahead.
Okay, so the first impression matters, and your impression starts before you start speaking. And the first thing I noticed was her white suit. And it's not just a fashion statement. The white suit represents women's suffrage. So right there, by what she was wearing, she made a statement. And then she entered from stage left, which is on the right-hand side from the audience's view, and walked across to the other side of the stage, waving, but in the middle, she applauded to the audience. So she recognized and included everyone, not just waving, I'm the star of the show, but you are the star of the show. So that was really, really brilliant. And she already made a connection and rapport from the get-go.
Absolutely. I don't know if there's any connection to you wearing a white suit today.
That was deliberate. Thank you for noticing.
Well, one of the unwritten rules of public speaking is to dress a little better than the audience. I think Kamala took that several notches up, and she was impeccably dressed. Her executive presence was on display all through. Speaking of stage use, Natsuyo rightly mentioned she moved from left to right. She made eye contact, and she does that throughout the speech, as we can see. And so because we're on this topic, let's move to non-verbal delivery, which is the use of gestures and body language. Since you've evaluated the speech before, you would have gone through the video. What are your observations in general about the way she uses gestures throughout the speech and what our audience can take away from it? Margaret,
Sure.
do you want to take that?
Oh.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the dress for a second. I also thought the satin blouse was fantastic because I felt like it threw light up on her face, possibly more than would have been available to her. And it was also kind of a softening effect as well. In terms of gestures, I think she ran the gamut and they were very effective. She used her head to nod yes at times when she was speaking to the audience, like, you'll get this point. And she also swaggered a little bit when she said, I may be the first vice president, the first woman vice president, but I won't be the last. And there was also another gesture, which I thought came from her heart when she was talking about her mother. And you could see that she kind of gulped or was trying to keep the tears away. So she was very in command and then also vulnerable at the same time.
That's a beautiful point. I think her delivery, she matched her mood to her speech, the emotions connected to how she expressed it. That was beautiful. Elaine, what are your thoughts? Anything else that you observed? Elaine, you there?
Yes, I am. I was on mute. I liked her smile. For most of this speech, when it was appropriate, she had this smile on her face, which to me not only lit up her face, but it helped to engage her with people. And she used it most of the time, except for when she was really dealing with something that was sad. For example, when she was talking about then, but that smile really caught my attention, and I'm sure that the audience picked up on it. The fact that, hey, I am with you. Yeah, thank you for voting for me. Everything that she was saying with words really, I think, tied in with the fact that her facial expressions, that smile, was congruous to what she was saying.
Absolutely, absolutely. I have a point to make, but I will turn it over to Natsuyo before I do that. Natsuyo, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I agree with Elaine that the smile, her smile, really stood out to me the most about her body language. Her body language was minimal, yet the smile was blossoming throughout the speech. And as Professor Merabian said, the listeners will be influenced by the facial expression or visual message 50%, 55% of the time, and voice or auditory information 38%, and words or verbal message 7%. So with the facial expression being the highest influence, she had the beautiful smile that was the most effective tool she could use. And one thing I noticed about her movements, she has a little bit of habit of moving her left arms, left elbow, time to time, unconsciously. So that was something she could improve if I were to coach her. But the smile was inviting, and it's a universal language.
Thank you. Those are some really great observations, especially the elbow. I would have not noticed that. Speaking of her smile, facial expressions, and gesture, what are the other things that you noticed that she used to actually engage the audience more? Nonverbal cues.
Me?
Not see you. You're in front of me.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Other things is her use of vocal variety in the Toastmasters terms. But if I go a little bit deeper, she uses very simple language, yet she puts weight in every single word, every operative word. Operative word is something, some words that are very important in one sentence or phrase. And she always had the clear operative words that she put stress on. And she had emotion in every single word she said. So that added more emotion and more authenticity and more sincereness. Mm-hmm. So I thought her speaking style is not too dynamic. I think her speaking style is a little bit more approachable and steady and maybe self-assured and assertive, yet the way she incorporated emotion into words was really superb.
And do you think, Elaine, this question's to you, do you think from what Natsuyo just said, that Kamala's speaking style of balancing emotions with assertiveness, is that unique? Have you seen that in other public speakers?
Yes, I have it. Can I go back a little bit to her,
Sure.
of the gestures? Because I thought that, of course, I guess she had a teleprompter. She was kind of stuck to the lectern. And yet I didn't get the feeling that she was tense. You know, some people are at the lectern and they're kind of tense up at the lectern itself. She seemed to be somewhat free with her body. So she moved as much as she could. I'm going to have to look at it again and see Natsuyo to see that elbow going up. But I thought that she seemed to be somewhat loose with her body at the lectern, knowing that she had to stay there because, again, she was dealing with the prompter. So, okay, I'm sorry. I needed to get that out. So what was my question?
I think to your point, Elaine, she appears extremely relaxed and composed, and it probably takes a lot of effort to appear effortless too. Yeah. Over to you again.
Okay, I'm sorry that you have to remind me of the question that you were asking.
Not quite sure I remember what I asked you. Yes, the vocal variety. So have you seen people, especially with orators and public leaders in public office, balancing emotion with assertiveness?
Oh, I think that it adds authenticity to the speech when you have that range of emotion and that it is balanced. And it comes across. So when you're saying something sad and you put that in your voice, that makes you authentic. And the same thing when you sound happy and you're smiling, it helps to make your message believable. And I thought that that's what came through with her message. It was believable by the range of volume and the variety of words that she used and the tones that she used and the pauses that she used.
Yeah, good point. Speaking of pause, a pause can be used to transition to another part of your speech. It can be used to build connection with the audience. It can be used for a dramatic effect, etc. And she uses pauses across her speech with different durations. And Margaret, what do you think? What were your impressions about the way she used the pause?
Excellent, really. And also, when she first came on stage, there was thunderous applause. And so she would go, good evening, and wait, and good evening. And then she would change the tonality so that there was a point when it was like she seriously wanted to get started with her speech. I mean, the tone changed. I'd also like to just go back also to some of your other points that I felt that she also, I don't know whether this would be counted a gesture, but I felt like she spoke with her eyes. I thought there was something so dynamic and joyful in her eyes that to me it was quite stunning. And also to Netsuyo's point about emphasizing certain words, they were beautiful. There were cadences where she talks about real work, hard work, or essential work that really kind of helped us bring out various themes of her presentation.
Beautiful point, Margaret. I was coming to rhythm and cadence, and you brought it up right there. There's a musicality to her voice. If you turn off the video and just listen to her, there's a musicality. She has used it really well to her strength. Right. Speaking of the point where she uses, a very good language. So what were your thoughts on language? Rhetorical wordplay, alliteration, etc.
For me?
Yes.
Yeah. Very effective. I thought she invokes John Lewis, and so she reiterates his name. And so again, it makes us pay attention. And then she comes up with the quote that he talked about, that democracy is not a state, it's an act. And I felt like we were in the very act of it, because here was this woman who's been elected, and these people, the audience, were confirming her.
Right.
Very
right.
powerful.
Speaking of John Lewis, that's right there at the beginning in her introduction. And a speech is not complete until we discuss its introduction and conclusion. These are the two most important segments that leave an indelible mark on the speaker. And Elaine, what were your thoughts on her introduction and her conclusion? Elaine, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Well, yeah, her introduction, I had down the same thing that Margaret did, that quotation from John Lewis. I thought it was very effective, first of all, because the people in her audience that were there, they knew John Lewis. He had been in the news recently, having passed away a few months ago. And so it was still fresh in their minds. So to invoke him, and he was obviously someone that was quite admired. So to use that speech to begin, democracy is not a state, it is an act. I thought it was very, very effective. It was a great way of starting out. And it helped to, I think, to give credence to what she was about to say. So I liked her opening. I have to admit that with the YouTube, I didn't hear the closing as much.
Yeah.
Maybe because the audience was screaming and hollering.
Right.
The opening itself, I thought was definitely very effective.
Right. I also think, although her conclusion is not in that video recording, it was more like a transition for Joe's entrance and his speech. So it was kind of tapered down. Natsuya, what are your thoughts on her introduction?
Sure, I'm going to go back a couple questions. Talking about pauses. Of course, she expected people will be cheering and she had to pause. But when you're speaking so fast and that the audience reacts and you want to take it in, sometimes you sound like you're interrupted and then you pause. But everything was so organic and natural, and partly because she was speaking very slowly. Her script had about 950 words for 10 minutes. And taking in all the pauses and everything, maybe she was speaking at around 110 words per minute. And just for your reference, I usually speak around 150 or 160 words per minute. So she was speaking very slowly and clearly. So with that, she was able to take in the pause very effectively and strategically. And also, you're asking about the introduction. She started with a quote, and the quote lasted for 8 seconds. And I usually call it 7:30 rule. In the first 7 seconds, your audience will determine your impression, and in 30 seconds, they will determine whether they're interested to hear more from this person or not. So she spent just about 8 seconds to use a quote and made a strong impression, and then continued on until it is only as strong as our willingness to fight for it, guard it, and never take it for granted. 30 seconds, period. So that was a perfect opening. And the closing was a very nice intro. She was heightening everyone's excitement and very emotional. And it was a great bridge to introduce Joe Biden. So that was, especially the opening was really, really strong.
Thanks, Natsuya. Your statement made me remember the vocal variety and that it matters. The speed and the volume and the pitch of the speaker matters. And Margaret, this question's to you. How did you assess the overall use of volume and speed as a combination in her speech?
Very good. I like Natsuyu. I felt that I was so impressed with how she spoke so slowly. She didn't rush at any part of her speech. And her voice is a pleasant voice. I mean, it's it's easy to listen to her. I mean, it's the whole package of her enthusiasm, her willing to speak to you as though she's speaking to a friend. I mean, she's very relatable. And I think that really came across, that she would be somebody you would love to have as a friend all the way around. And I just want to mention also that really the point of this speech was to introduce Joe Biden. And yet I felt like we had a real sense of her. And it was an unusual speech because I think she was I could be wrong on this, only the second vice president who was asked to make an introduction like this before the actual investiture of the offices. So again, I thought it was a great sense of their partnership at this point.
Absolutely, absolutely. When you say she could be seen as a friend, I think that was one of the biggest takeaways of the speech. If you watch Kamala speak, and if you'd removed her from that podium and put her at a dinner table with friends and family, she would still seem natural. You
Yeah.
couldn't take a past president speech and play the same, switching the environment. They wouldn't fit in. Theirs was a real public speech, while hers is more conversational and relatable, yet authoritative. So she did a great job. And with that, I would like to ask you, all of you, what were your favorite catchphrases or usages in the speech that stood out, memorable phrases from that? Elaine?
Yeah, she had a number of catchphrases. Well, one of the things that she did is she used words. she would emphasize the words that she wanted us to remember: unity, science, truth.
Mhm.
She did audacity, loyal, honest, prepared. But there was a phrase that she used that I really like. She said, you chose unity and science and truth. And then she switched, you chose Joe Biden. I thought that was a wonderful way of, I think, saying to the audience, hey, you did a great job, but then also introducing, Joe Biden, basically. So she did the you chose with these words, and you chose Joe Biden. But the other thing that I wanted to say, somebody, I think it was Margaret, who was talking about the fact that this was, she didn't say it this way, but I think that Kamala Harris was the opening act for Joe Biden. And I think that she did it quite well without taking any of his glory. Right? So I thought that she was very effective in doing that. A good opening act in her own right that made people feel good about the fact that they voted for her, but really they voted for Joe Biden. So that was my thought.
Well put, Elaine. And if anything, she gave him credit for choosing her.
Mhm. Yeah.
Cecilia, what are your thoughts? Any
Memor-
memorable catchphrases, word usage? Go ahead.
Yeah, of course, my favorite is, while I may be the first woman in this office, I won't be the last. That became the famous phrase out of the speech. And that's my favorite. And also, we the people. So she included everybody, right? And also she used, this is somewhat similar to what Elaine said, but she used some rhetorical devices, something called anaphora, which means it's a technique to repeat the same word at the beginning of successive sentences or phrase. For example, toward the end, she said, to rebuild our economy, to root out, to combat, to unite. So this is a repetition of the same beginning. And also, it's his love for Jill, it's his love for Hunter. So these repetitions is very effective that we can remember her message. And also every time she repeats, she emphasizes what she's saying, that the core of the message. So that technique was very remarkable.
Yes, I agree with you. Margaret, what are your thoughts?
I agree with the repetition, that I thought that was very effectively done. And at one point, she has almost a call to arms where she says, the soul of America is at stake. And I thought she really drove that point home. And it sort of elevated like the seriousness of what's been going on and what this is all about. Those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Margaret. I also noticed that she used the rule of three in her speech throughout. For example, when she gives a message to the children, says, dream with ambition, lead with conviction, and see yourselves in a way that others may not. And I love how she also brings in pace. She says, we will applaud you every step of the way. She deliberately slows down to emphasize each word. She definitely has a great knack for public speaking. We have a question from our audience. So Radhi asks, can you comment on the way she makes a strong statement and then nods her head in agreement? Who wants to take that?
I did notice that, and I felt it was, you know, she wanted us to really understand. It was a point of emphasis, I think, for me. As you're shaking
Elaine?
your head.
Yes, absolutely in agreement.
Yeah, I didn't hear the strong statement, but I noticed there was a lot of times when she nodded her head in agreement. Sometimes people in the crowd would call out something and she would nod like, yes, yes, yes. And I thought that was a great way of responding to the audience. I can't remember specifically what it was that the audience member said, but they called out, and of course they were so excited about this whole thing, and they were calling out, and she recognized them by saying, yes, yes.
Thank you, Elaine. Natsuyo, any last thoughts?
Sure, I totally agree with Margaret and Elaine. And I think the nodding was to create a dialogue between Kamala and the audience. The public speaking is never a one-way communication. It's a two-way dialogue. But in a huge stage like that, speaking to thousands of people, millions of people through the camera, it's really difficult to create a dialogue. But she was making a statement, messaging everyone, and nodding as if she's conversing with the audience and she's agreeing with their agreement. So she created this interactiveness by her nods.
Absolutely. There's a point where she says, you chose, and she points at the audience. If you're watching it on screen, you think she's talking to you. She made it very personal. Thank you so much. I think this was a great panel discussion, if I may say so. Our timer is keeping quiet, but I assume we have to stop here. So I really thank our three panelists for their immense contribution and the pearls of wisdom they dropped around evaluating Kamala Harris's communication style. From the way she walked on stage, to her gestures, to the emotion in her voice, to the choice of her words, I think Kamala Harris balanced being triumphant with being tranquil. And by going back to the word balance, I think that's what we look for in a leader, someone who's grounded and centered, and she promises to be that. I mean, I can't wait to see the speeches she will make, and I believe we'll have many more panel discussions just to evaluate her. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I hope we can do more panel discussions. And with this, I would like to turn it over to the Toastmaster of the day, but Natsuyo has something to say. Final words. Yes, Natsuyo, go for it.
Thank you. Well, one thing I really wanted to comment was her use of the word you. In the first 3.5 minutes, she used you or your 13 times. That's a lot. So this is what I call you focused. And this is what everyone, all of us want to use as a technique. When you make the audience the subject instead of I, all of a sudden it becomes about them. So she used you. Her messages were all you focused, or if she wasn't using you, it was we. And the only places she used I was when she was talking about personal story. So you, we will include everyone, and that makes a very sticky, strong, sticky message. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Natsuyo. It's a well-made observation. I've seen it too. She's only used I overall 11 times, and she's stuck with your, us, and you, which is great. It's a sign of a great leader. Thank you. I shall now hand it over to our Toastmaster of the day, Marjorie. Over to you.